In the dusty archives of the municipality of Richmond, Virginia, documents exist that have waited decades for their stories to be told. In early 2025, a group of historians reorganizing old archives discovers what at first seems to be merely a curious Victorian-era anomaly. A large-format photograph, dated 1890, depicting the Hargrove family. All its members, both adults and children, are noticeably overweight, proudly posing in front of a grand Victorian mansion. The photograph itself seems to be just evidence of unusual prosperity for the time. But when the image was digitized and enlarged, details emerged, prompting questions about the true nature of this family idol. This discovery launched an investigation that would expose a dark chapter of American medical history, hidden for over a century. Laura Petrovsky, the project's lead archivist, noticed something that had escaped initial examination. In the enlarged image, identical marks were visible on the wrists and ankles of each family member, partially concealed by their clothing. Even more disturbing, the two children standing in the foreground cast frightened glances toward a closed window at the rear of the mansion. What was hidden behind those windows that so frightened the children during what should have been an ordinary family photograph? What did those strange marks, worn by every member of the family from the youngest child to the patriarch himself, signify? We are in the heart of historic Richmond, where Victorian mansions majestically rise on quiet streets, guarding the secrets of the past. In Virginia, the beginning of 2025 was unusually cold, and when I meet with Dr. Michael Kowalski, a leading historian at the University of Richmond, his breath forms a cloud of vapor in the frosty air. He leads me to the Valentine Historic Library, where a group of researchers has gathered around the antique photograph that triggered one of the most disturbing discoveries in the history of American medical ethics. The end of the 19th century was a period of great change for the American South. Richmond, once the capital of the Confederacy, was trying to recover from the devastating Civil War. The city was experiencing a period of industrialization and economic growth, but also faced social upheaval and a power struggle between the old aristocracy and new industrialists. It was during this time that the Hargrove family arrived in Richmond from Europe, where Dr. James Hargrove had already acquired a dubious reputation among medical circles in London and Vienna. According to city records found in the archives, Dr. Hargrove purchased an imposing mansion on the outskirts of Richmond in 1877. The building, designed in the neo-Gothic style, stood out among other structures with its high towers and dark, red brick facade. The mansion was situated on a vast estate, surrounded by a stone wall almost 10 feet high, which was unusual even for wealthy residents of that time. Professor Elizabeth Novikova, a specialist in the history of medicine, shows me a copy of Dr. Hargrove's medical license, issued to him in Richmond on March 15, 1858. The document states that Dr. Hargrove specialized in, I quote, research in the fields of nutrition and metabolic processes of the human body. At that time, this area of medicine was in its infancy, and those who engaged in such research often enjoyed considerable freedom in their methods. And from letters discovered in the archives of the Medical Society of Virginia, it becomes clear that Dr. Hargrove maintained close ties with a group of doctors calling themselves the Society for Physiological Advancements. In one of the letters, dated April 20, 1789, a certain Dr. William Preston writes, "My dear Hargrove, your experiments on appetite control and nutrient accumulation are of extreme interest to our society. We are prepared to provide additional funding in the amount of $5,000 to expand your research, provided that the results remain exclusively within our circle." The weather in Richmond becomes even colder as Dr. Kowalski and I inspect the site where the Hargrove mansion once stood. Today, there is a modern residential complex, bearing no resemblance to the dark history of this land. The cold wind pierces to the bone, as if reminding us of the suffering that took place here more than a century ago. According to documents found in the municipal archives, the Hargrove family consisted of the doctor himself, his wife Martha, their 3 children, Charles, Eleanor, and Edward, as well as 2 adopted children, Lucy and Thomas, whom they supposedly took from the St. Mary's Orphanage in Boston. However, further investigation revealed that no such orphanage ever existed, which casts doubt on the origin of these children. The Hargrove mansion appeared as a model of Victorian splendor, with meticulously manicured gardens and regular social events. The family rarely appeared in public, but when they did, their unusual obesity caused considerable chatter among Richmond residents. In the Richmond Daily newspaper from June 3, 1993, there is a small note. The Hargrove family attended yesterday's charity ball to benefit the new hospital. Their impressive size seems to increase with each appearance in society, causing both admiration for their apparent well-being and concern about the state of their health. Dr. Hargrove explained his family's obesity as a hereditary trait and a new dietary system he was developing, which, he claimed, ensured excellent health despite the increased weight. This system was supposedly based on the principles of oversaturating the body with nutrients, which, according to the doctor's theory, should lead to increased life expectancy and resistance to disease. Outwardly, the Hargrove mansion functioned as a private clinic, where the doctor received wealthy patients suffering from various eating disorders. However, as the discovered records show, the real activity taking place behind its walls was much more sinister. This channel is not for everyone, but if you are interested in the dark pages of medical history, stay with us. In what part of the United States are you listening to this investigation right now? The turning point in the investigation came when historians discovered Dr. Hargrove's personal diary, hidden in the false bottom of an antique medical chest, donated to the Richmond Medical University Museum in 1952. The diary, covering the period from 1899 to 1920, reveals horrifying details of Dr. Hargrove's experiments. Sarah Lee, a specialist in Victorian medicine, struggles to contain her emotions when she shows me fragments of this diary. Dr. Hargrove's handwriting, small and neat, reflects his methodical and calculating nature. The entry from September 17, 1890, reads, "Today, I began a new feeding regimen for Eleanor, increased the dose of the drug to 15 milliliters. Initial resistance was overcome by applying an electrical stimulator to the wrists. The restraints have been improved. After 3 hours of forced feeding, I managed to introduce 4,000 calories. Weight increased by approximately 1/4 of a pound in a week. The society will be pleased with the progress." Every member of the Hargrove family, including the doctor's wife, was a subject of his experiments. The children, according to the records, were subjected to the most aggressive methods, since, as Hargrove wrote, their metabolism was most amenable to modification. The system developed by the doctor included special restraints to hold the subjects during the forced feeding procedure, which explains the strange marks on the wrists and ankles noticed in the photograph. But the family was only the beginning. According to entries in the diary, Dr. Hargrove regularly acquired new subjects for his experiments, mainly from among impoverished immigrants and orphans. In an entry from May 4, 1794, he writes, "New subject, an Italian girl, approximately 9 years old, is showing significant resistance to feeding. After 3 days of starvation, she has become more compliant. Martha suggests introducing her as a new adopted daughter if the experiment proves successful. Assigned her the name Lucy for the documents. Dr. Alexei Kuznetsov, a forensic pathologist involved in the analysis of the medical aspects of the case, explains the essence of Hargrove's experiments. Judging by the descriptions in the diary, he developed a mixture of hormonal preparations, animal pancreatic extracts, and chemical appetite stimulants. This mixture was administered to the subjects daily, followed by forced feeding through a special tube. The goal was not simply to increase weight, but to fundamentally alter metabolism and create a complete dependence on excessive nutrition. The most shocking discoveries concern the fate of the so-called unsuccessful subjects. The diary contains records of at least 17 people who passed away as a result of the experiments. Their bodies were secretly buried on the grounds of the estate. In an entry from November 12, 1996, Hargrove coldly notes, "Subject N14 departed this life after liver failure. Autopsy revealed interesting changes in the structure of the organ. I have preserved tissue samples for further study. The body was disposed of in the usual manner. Tomorrow, Preston will bring 2 new subjects from the orphanage." Before we continue this disturbing narrative, consider what you would do if you found such a photograph in your family archives. Leave a comment with your theory about how such crimes could remain undetected for so long. Helen Wong, a specialist in historical photography, conducts further analysis of the discovered photograph of the Hargrove family. Using modern technology, she discovers another disturbing detail that escaped initial inspection. In the enlarged image of the window at which the frightened children are looking, one can distinguish the silhouette of a person, presumably watching the photographic process from inside the house. Analysis of the proportions and position of the figure indicates that the person was probably tied to a chair or another device. City records show that Dr. Hargrove employed a significant number of staff, including cooks, gardeners, and nannies. However, the turnover rate was unusually high. According to tax returns for the period from 1790 to 1799, over 400 employees passed through the Hargrove mansion each year, many of whom worked for only a few months. Police reports from that time contain several reports of missing persons last seen heading to work at the Hargrove mansion, but these reports never led to serious investigations. One of the key witnesses in this historical investigation is Margaret Williams, granddaughter of Eleanor Hargrove, one of the doctor's daughters. She is now 87 years old and still lives in Richmond. Margaret tells of the strange stories her mother, Beatrice, told her about her childhood. Mom never spoke directly about what happened in that house, but she had nightmares until the end of her life, says Margaret. She was always afraid of doctors and never allowed us to eat more than necessary. When I was a child, she often checked my wrists and ankles, as if looking for some marks. Only now do I understand why. According to medical records found in the archives of St. Joseph's Hospital in Richmond, Beatrice Hargrove, Eleanor's daughter, born in 1908, suffered from numerous metabolic disorders, including early-onset diabetes and thyroid problems. In her medical chart from 1915, the doctor notes, "The patient demonstrates unusual metabolic disturbances, possibly related to hereditary factors or early nutritional exposure. Old scars are present on the wrists and ankles, of unknown origin." Dr. Hargrove kept detailed records of the physiological changes in the bodies of his subjects, graphs of weight gain, changes in metabolism, reactions to various food stimulants. All of this was documented with scientific precision. Particular attention was paid to the children who, according to Hargrove's records, demonstrated the most dramatic and sustained changes. In an entry from March 3, 1897, he writes, "Charles has reached a weight of 210 pounds at the age of 12. Insulin production increased by 320% compared to normal. Liver enlarged by approximately 40%, according to palpation. Resistance is virtually absent. The subject now voluntarily consumes up to 7,000 calories daily. Dependence on food is completely formed. Without my drugs, he experiences severe withdrawal symptoms. The model is complete." The cruelty of Dr. Hargrove's experiments becomes even more evident when examining the diaries of his wife, Martha, found hidden in a hollow book in an antique store in Richmond in 2022. Martha, herself the first subject of her husband's experiments, describes the torment the family endured. On June 24, 1795, she writes, "Today, I could not get out of bed because of the pain. James increased the dose. He says that my body has adapted to the previous one. I feel like my body is betraying me. The constant hunger is unbearable. The children are even worse. I hear Eleanor crying at night. Lucy tried to run away last Tuesday. James locked her in the basement for 3 days without food. Now she eats everything he gives her without questions. God help us." In parallel with personal experiments on his family, Dr. Hargrove conducted extensive research for the mysterious Society for Physiological Advancements. Judging by the financial documents found in the archives of a Richmond bank, the society transferred significant sums to the doctor's account, especially after his quarterly reports. Professor James Lee, a historian of science specializing in secret scientific societies of the 19th century, explains, "The Society for Physiological Advancements was one of many pseudoscientific societies that arose in the late 19th century, when the boundaries of medical ethics were extremely blurred. Their interest in Hargrove's experiments was likely related to eugenic ideas popular at the time. They were looking for ways to control human physiology, and Hargrove's work on forcibly altering metabolism was of great interest to them. One of the most disturbing discoveries was Dr. Hargrove's plan to expand his experiments. In records from 1900, he mentions negotiations with several private schools and orphanages about the possibility of implementing his methods of nutritional control under the guise of a new wellness program. On April 12, 1900, he writes, "The meeting with the director of St. Elizabeth's School was successful. Mr. Porter expressed interest in my controlled nutrition program for students, promising significant improvement in the health and obedience of the children. An initial experiment on 50 subjects could begin as early as this fall. The Society has approved additional funding in the amount of $1,000 for this phase. Fortunately, this plan was not destined to come to fruition. In October of 1901, a major fire broke out in the Hargrove mansion, destroying most of the structure and claiming the lives of several people. The official version at the time spoke of an accident caused by a malfunction of the gas equipment. However, recently discovered documents from the personal archive of the Richmond chief of police of that period, John Myers, shed a different light on these events. In a confidential report dated November 5, 1901, Myers writes, "The investigation of the fire at Dr. Hargrove's mansion has revealed suspicious circumstances. Evidence indicates arson, likely organized by one of the employees. Upon inspection of the basement premises, the least damaged by the fire, devices resembling torture instruments were found, as well as a significant amount of medical preparations of unknown purpose. Given Dr. Hargrove's high position and his connections in the city council, the investigation will be conducted with extreme caution. Although the investigation was never completed, and Dr. Hargrove and the surviving members of his family soon left Richmond, moving first to Europe and then disappearing without a trace from historical records, the documents discovered today allow us to reconstruct this dark chapter of American history. A modern investigation conducted by a group of archaeologists from the University of Richmond in 2023 at the site of the former Hargrove mansion confirmed the presence of human remains in several locations on the property. Carbon dating showed that the burials date to the period between 1890 and 1891. Anthropological analysis of the remains revealed unusual pathologies corresponding to the experiments described in the doctor's diary, including bone deformations characteristic of extreme obesity in young subjects and traces of traumatic injuries on the wrists and ankles. Dr. Hargrove never stood trial for his crimes. According to the last discovered records, he died in Switzerland in 1911 from complications of diabetes. The irony is that the disease that developed in him was probably the result of his own experiments, from which, according to medical records, he did not exclude himself. As for the children who fell victim to his experiments, their fates varied. Charles Hargrove died at the age of 19 from cardiac arrest caused by extreme obesity. Eleanor was able to partially restore her health and lived to be 50 years old, managing to start a family. Edward Hargrove was placed in a psychiatric hospital in 1905 and spent the rest of his life there. The fates of the adopted children, Lucy and Thomas, remain unknown after the fire of 1901. Robert Clark, director of the Richmond Historical Society, emphasizes the significance of this investigation. The story of Dr. Hargrove and his victims reminds us of the dark pages of medical history and the importance of ethical standards in science. These events took place in a period when medical experiments were often conducted without consent and supervision, especially on vulnerable populations. Our duty to the victims is to preserve the memory of them and to prevent the repetition of such crimes. As a result of this historical investigation, the names of known victims of Dr. Hargrove have been added to the Memorial to Victims of Institutional Violence in the United States, opened in Washington in 2020. The photograph of the Hargrove family, which initially attracted the attention of historians, is now on display at the Museum of Medical Ethics in Boston as a reminder of the importance of humanistic principles in scientific research. The historian Michael Kowalski, standing under the cold winter rain on the site of the former mansion, thoughtfully looks at the memorial plaque recently installed here. The story of the Hargrove family reminds us that sometimes the most terrible monsters wear respectable masks, use scientific language, and act under the guise of progress. Behind every historical photograph, behind every archival document, there may be stories waiting to be told, so that justice, even if belated, prevails. As I leave Richmond, the gray winter sky gradually darkens, reminding me of the shadows of the past that never completely disappear. The story of Dr. Hargrove and his victims, hidden for over a century, has now become part of collective memory, a reminder that some pages of history are written not in ink, but in the tears and blood of those who could not protect themselves.